of that dream. And the second slide is as how Promised Messiah Islam has narrated this one in Tazkirah. And I will try to make it as easy as possible to understand. Please keep in mind, this dream is from 1934 or 35. That means Promised Messiah Islam was just around 30 years old at that time. Yeah, I was 1865, 65, 4, 5. So he was just 30 years old. In this dream, in this dream, Promised Messiah Islam saw Holy Prophet ﷺ, and Holy Prophet ﷺ addressed him as Ahmed. So to make it easier, I will use for Holy Prophet ﷺ as Holy Prophet ﷺ, and for Promised Messiah Islam as Hazur, so that we can understand the dream easily. In this dream, Hazur saw Holy Prophet ﷺ, and Holy Prophet ﷺ pointed towards his right hand and asked him, what does he have in his right hand? Hazur saw towards his right hand and saw a book, and he had the feelings as if he wrote that book. And he told Holy Prophet ﷺ, this is my book. Holy Prophet ﷺ asked him to give him the book. As soon as Holy Prophet ﷺ took the book and his blessed hands touched the book, it converted into a beautiful, delicious fruit. Holy Prophet ﷺ cut that fruit in many pieces. As he was cutting that fruit, a juice like honey was coming out of that fruit, and that was coming from his fingers to his elbow, dripping down. Holy Prophet ﷺ asked Hazur to, Holy Prophet ﷺ took one piece of that fruit and ate himself, and gave the rest of the part to Hazur, and asked him to give some of that to the dead man who is outside. Hazur gave one piece so that that person can revive and can get more strength. Hazur gave one piece to that man, and in that time, Allah Almighty put in his mind, to Hazur's mind, this dead man is Islam, our religion. And then it came to Hazur's mind that from Allah Ta'ala, that Islam will revive by his hands through the blessing of Holy Prophet ﷺ. And if we looked at India of that time, we call subcontinent India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. That was a time when there were tons of scholars writing humongous books, including Muslims, Hindus, Christians, every kind of religion, because that was pretty much quite central for every religion to convert people towards their religion. And if we see, perhaps Promised Messiah Islam, one of the most person who was in a very remote area, Qadian. So anyone who has gone there, they know very well. Any proper city is maybe 10-20 miles from there, and the best of communication is at that time was to walk, or the best one was horse carriage. And we know the roads of those areas. You've got to have good bones to travel on those roads in a carriage. And Huzur was in that town and sees this dream, and that dream was from God. So when God decides something, that happens. Kun fayakun. No one can stop it. And it was almost 24 years before Promised Messiah Islam got first initiation. Who could have imagined that Promised Messiah Islam is Ahmed is going to be one day Promised Messiah Islam after so many years? But it was Qadian, remote area, but it was God who decided that thing. So this is the gist of that dream that I tried to make it easier for everybody to understand. The fruit looked like a guava, but it was as big as watermelon. So next slide, please. Okay, please. Next, we have talked about slide. Can we have the next slide? Promised Messiah Lassam's work started to come to America even much before that. We are very familiar with one of Promised Messiah Lassam's revelation. I shall cause thy message to reach the corners of the earth. So that was also from Allah Almighty, and it had to have to be accomplished, and no one was going to stop it. And it started even before Prophet Muhammad proclaimed to be the Messiah of the time. And in fact, in early 80s, his work started to be getting published in different articles here. There was one society that is Theosophists, and their motto was to prepare their mission was to prepare humanity for the reception of a word teacher bringing universal truth to mankind. Members of that society included Thomas Edison, Alexander Russell Webb. That was in September 1886. And after that, one man from St. Louis sent Hazur's article to New York Tribune, and the editor wrote in that Tribune, there's a pious Mohammedan prophet in the Punjab who says that he is specially inspired to convert the Western civilized world to the faith of Islam. That was March 27, 1887. And in this one, Prophet sent a message that's very profound, very powerful message. And it says, Sir, with all respect and humility, I, the compiler of Brahine Ahmadiyya, beg to say that the Almighty has commissioned me to try all the Nazarene's prophet, Christ, quote unquote Christ, to amend the morals of mankind with utmost humility, loneliness, respect, submission, meekness, and to point out to the unacquainted the straight way by which we can obtain salvation, perceive the manifestation of heavenly life, and by which the marks of being loved but by the Almighty become visible even in the physical world. So profound that if you do these things in this physical world, you will start to see that you are blessed. That was the message that Huzur gave in that to that magazine, to these magazines, and it was even before he proclaimed to be promised Messiah al-Islam. And in fact, he started to see the fruit of his work even before becoming promised Messiah al-Islam. And in fact, in 1888, the guy Muhammad, his name was at that time Alexander Russell Webb, who had joined Theosophical Society of New York in the search of enlightenment. He was Christian, had left Christianity for that purpose. After he read Hazur's invitation, he starts to communicate with the Hazur, sitting in Qadian. And this was not an ordinary person. This person was a writer, publisher, and United States Consul to the Philippines appointed by President Cleveland. Just not ordinary person. And in 1888, he is considered to be the first, the historian have considered him the first earliest prominent Anglo-American Muslim converted to Islam. Not Ahmadiyya, because at that time Huzur has not started Jamaat either. And when Promised Messiah passed away, he wrote the condolence letter, and he wrote, Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad accomplished a great undertaking and conveyed the light of truth to hundreds of hearts. More than 20 years ago, I started to correspond with him. I have been deeply affected by the fearless earnestness with which he spreaded the truth. Can we go to the next slide, please? Next slide, please. Okay. So this is the slide that I have already talked. Please go back. Yes. Okay. All right. And in fact, he was the first person, he was the only person, I don't know about this part, in 1893, that was a Parliament of the World's Religions in Chicago. He was the only Muslim representing Islam in that conference. And what was the great importance of that conference, I don't know. And in fact, when I said that God said, I shall cause thy message to reach the corners of the earth, in fact, Promised Messiah Islam started to see the fruit of that one right in his lifetime. And the first man who converted, who started to communicate, correspond with Hazrat Mufti Muhammad Sadiq Sahab, I think we have to go to the next slide. This is on this slide. Okay, I'm sorry, the slide before? One slide before, please. One slide before, please. Okay. Yes, the person on the far left at the bottom, that's the first person who converted to Ahmadiyyat Islam in 1901 after correspondence with Hazrat Mufti Muhammad Sadiq Sahab. So his name, I have to say the name, Mirza Hassan F.L. Ahmad Anderson. So that was his name written here. And he accepted Ahmadiyya through the correspondence with Mufti Muhammad Sadiq Sahab. Yes, next slide, please. So there was some, at this prophecy that we have heard multiple of times, that is a duel between Promised Messiah Islam and John Alexander Dowie, who proclaimed to be Prophet Elijah, the forerunner of Jesus in his second advent. Dewey claimed if he was not God's prophet, then there was none else in the whole world who could be true prophet. Addressing the Muslims, he asked them to embrace Christianity, otherwise, according to him, they would perish from the earth. That was his challenge. And when Promised Messiah Islam heard about Dr. Dowie, and he called upon him to stop his agonistic remarks about the Holy Prophet ﷺ of Islam. Hazrat Ahmad sent a leaflet to Dr. Dowie, challenging him to enter into a prayer contest with him that whosoever was a liar should die during the life of the truthful one. Dowie died before Hazrat Ahmad in March 1907 in the fulfillment of the divine prophecy. Over 100 media articles documented the exchange and the truth of Hazrat Ahmad's claim. And others are the pictures about that, the person and Promised Messiah Islam. Can we go to... Okay. Can we go to the next slide, please? And in this slide, we can see Hazrat Mufti Muhammad Sadiq Sahab sitting on the foot of his master, Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad alayhi salatu wasalam. Hazrat Mufti Sadiq Sahab, he was already in England and doing his job, and Hazrat Khalifa Masih Sani, second Khalifa, asked him to come to America, to a land that he never knew. What's going to be weather? He came in. And right after he stepped on to America, he was not even allowed to step, and he was detained with the fear that he is going to uh, preach for polygamy. But Hazrat Mufti Muhammad Sadiq Sahib was able to make very clear that commandments and permission are two different things. Along with the Islamic commandment to obey all laws of land, he was let to go. And he established his first mission in New York in April 1920. And up till May, he came in February. May 20th, he was able to convert up to that time 12 people to Ahmadiyyat in Islam, including Mrs. S.W. Solovetsky, who was the first American woman to accept Ahmadiyyat in the fulfillment of the prayer dream. Next, please. Okay. Next slide, please. And in 1921, I have to go fast. 21, he launched the Muslim Sunrise, the magazine that we still see, and has been very important to us. And Hazrat Muslim Maud sent his message. I was just going abstract that the previous colonizers did their job on worldly level, but our job, we are going to colonize America on spiritual level, and our reward is going to be far beyond, because we will have our fruit even at the day of judgment. Next slide, please. Okay. So Mufti Muhammad Sadiq Sahib came to America in 1920 and he left in 1923. In 1921, in 12 months, he gave 50 lectures. Can we go to the next slide, please? 50 lectures in different cities. And in fact, I even don't know some name of these cities. And it's written all the, if we go to the next slide, the different topics that he has addressed in his speeches. And he was able to convert 700 Americans to Ahmadiyyat in Islam. And we see this picture is from from one of the auto worker halls from Detroit. How he was able to gather so many people, and most of his programs were published in different articles even before he was coming to the program. So he was able to stir up the people and bring people this way, and this is all workers seems to be, and he is dressing them in this way, in this manner. That is great to see. And there's the picture on the right, on the left, that is showing that the Muslims celebrate feast of Eid al-Fitr. So this is all what happened in his time period. And in the small articles that those there, in one he is saying that Islam, in Christianity, there's nothing to address what is black and white. We have not heard this thing in Islam. Every man is equal. Who comes to the masjid first will stand on the first line. Even if the king comes after that, is not going to take that place. Is going to stand whenever he is come and whatever space he is going to get. And in the second one, about the Jesus' second coming, that hundreds of dates have been put up till now. And in fact, at that time, there was one date put up in 1925, and he said that date is not too far, and that will come and go, and Messiah is not going to come that you are expecting, because Messiah has already come in Qadian, Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad al-Islam. Jazakallah.
One really quick point, just in regard to why all this is happening, that it is a result of the Prophet Messiah's dream, and then his son, only 30 years old at the time that he decided that he wanted to send Mufti Muhammad Sadiq here to North America. So just think, as this thing is unfolding, the impact that we're having here this is as a result of the Prophet Messiah's dream, and then his son having the wisdom, the insight, the hikmah to send this man here to begin to deliver the message. And within this really short period of time, he's already converted up to 700 people. That, this is really something we should be thinking about in terms of our roles.
Jazakallah, and Jazakallah to Dr. Tasham Saab. Next, I'll call up Dr. Naim Bhatti Saab for the next 9 slides. We could start, or 10 slides. We can start on slide number 10, please.
Assalamu alaikum. So the Sahib said, time is of the essence. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. The next few slides essentially are going to take the history of Ahmadiyyat from the Roaring Twenties through about the Civil War movement in the 1960s. So, as the Rafiq Saab aptly pointed out, when Hazrat Mufti Muhammad Sadiq Saab came to the United States, he really lit things up, to put it mildly. 700 Ahmadis are known to be converts in the early days when he came. But he wasn't done when he left. On his way back, on the trip back, he stopped off in Paris. So this is a very prestigious location here. Some people may not know. So the Institute of Engineers in Paris, only really invited guests are usually presenting at this institution. Mufti Muhammad Sadiq Saab is in the middle of this and is really presiding over the intelligentsia of Paris at the time. So his message was very appealing to Parisians as well as Americans there. When he was in the United States, amongst these early converts, there were Hispanic people, many, many women. Women were very, very eager to hear the message of Mufti Muhammad Sadiq Saab. There are some very interesting, detailed descriptions of him by some early American women converts. He was this dashing young man with a green robe and green turban. He's described in a very, very endearing way. The other thing I just wanted to mention early on, not much is sometimes made of the second Maulvi who did a lot of work here. Maulvi Saab, Muhammad Deen Sahib, is credited both by Ahmadis as well as non-Ahmadis. The early Nation of Islam leaders directly credit him of being one of the teachers of Islam to them. So his mention is made in both African history as well as the history of Nation of Islam. Next slide, please. So this is after World War I, and the world is, piecing itself back together. And if anybody's even traveled to one country with children or parents or an entourage, now you can imagine in the 30s and 20s what it takes to establish missions in multiple places where just reaching that location provides to be, the greatest challenge. So these missions that exploded in the 20s and early 30s, some of these jamaats that in the Middle East, in Indonesia, this jamaat in South America, were basically established by khuddam, young khuddam, that, they were following the message of the Prophet, who some had seen with their own eyes, and the fervor that they had just is on display by where jamaats have been started and where our centers are, the headquarters are so strong there that opposition is very fierce there. This is a nice little picture of some of these early missionaries. If you look at this picture, it's hard to get a close eye of this. Once again, young Muslim men. Look at these young Muslim men there. Nobody can mistake these are young Muslim men. So one of them is the late Sufi Bengali Sahib, Sufi Mutir Rahman Bengali Sahib. There's a very nice picture of him in many, many of the lectures given, and the newspapers that publish these lectures would always get a picture of him. So there are many pictures of him in American newspapers. One of the pictures that was saved was this picture in basically Middle America, where he was invited to a congregation and he spoke in front of people. These people are probably people that we see as grandmas and grandpas in our communities who've perhaps heard the message of Islam and Ahmadiyya a long time ago.
Can I interrupt for a minute? Does anyone know any relatives of Sufi Mutiur Rahman Sahib living here in Philadelphia? Right.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Khalilur Rahman Sufi Sahib, who was member of the Jamaat who passed away several years ago, was his son. He was who is the member of Philadelphia Jamaat. So he has such a close relationship with Philadelphia Jamaat.
The prolific nature of these Khuddam and young Ansar, these missionaries gave literally a lecture every 3 days in some years. So a lecture every 3 days, the audience was not 20 people, 30 people, these would be hundreds of people who would come in attendance. 1920s, early pre-war, pre-World War II America was rife to hear this dialogue that they were talking about equality and man's role with God and the relationship of man to God. So their halls would be packed. Some say if 700 converts are documented, how many people do you think were in front of them, that of them 700 people decided to enter Islam and Ahmadiyya? Next slide, please. There are a few names here. Some of these names you may have seen, and some of these people you may have perhaps seen at Jalsas, but they may have been fairly elderly. Rashid Saab, who recently passed away. A lot is known about him. Many of you may have met him. Some of the Rashid Ahmad Sahib. There's a story shared here that when he traveled to Rabwa in 1949, he was the first African-American Ahmadi who studied at Jamia over there. And he had the opportunity to sit and get to know Hazrat Khalifatul Masih II. And he was especially honored by, when he left Jamia, he was given a letter by Hazrat Saab. And on leaving Jamia, this is the letter that he received from Hazrat Saab. It describes the relationship of a servant and a Khalifa. The letter states, "Here's something for your journey." Money was presented as well. "I'm old and weak. Maybe it is our last meeting. If so, I entrust you to God. Remember, if I was ever angry with you, it was for your sake. And if I was ever pleased with you, it was for the sake of God. Be steadfast and forever stick to the center in all conditions. May God help you die as a Muslim. Be compassionate to your wife and children, and God be with you. Yours fraternally, Mirza Bashiruddin Mahmud Ahmad, Rabwa, December 12th, 1954. This letter was in English.
Can I interrupt for a minute too? Does anyone know here any relation, any person living in Philadelphia who's related to Rashid Sahib? His wife, Sister Rashida, is the wife of Aziza Rashid Sahiba is the wife of missionary Rashid Sahib, who is from Milwaukee. And Sufi Mutiur Rahman Sahib, I mentioned earlier, was a Bengali Sahib who was the missionary here in the United States for many years. His son, Khalil Rahman Sufi, and then his grandson, Mutiur Rahman Sufi, he still lives in Philadelphia. He's one of our brothers. If you have not seen him a little while because of his ill health, but please remember all these people who are the relatives and survivors of these great men that we're talking about today.
one more point is that Auntie Aziza is the sister of Auntie Jamila, who is the wife of Uncle Munir, who is our president. So just wanted to add that note.
A lot of local connections. A few more will be coming. There are a few people mentioned here as well. Ibn Yamin Sahib was a member of the St. Louis Jamaat. He was one of the eyewitness recallers of the prophecy of the eclipsing of the lunar eclipse and the solar eclipse during the Prophet Messiah's lifetime. Ibrahim Khalil Saab was also one of the first Native Americans to convert to Ahmadiyyat. He was very vocal, and he kept a sign outside of his barbershop that said Jesus did not die on the cross. So he's a very vocal convert. Sister Aisha Augusta Atkinson of Hermosa Beach is known to some of the folks in the California Jamaat who uncovered some history about her. And Abdul Malik Sahib accepted Ahmadiyyat towards the end of World War II when he was stationed in Africa. When he came back, he started the Milwaukee Jamaat. Next slide, please. The Dayton, Ohio mission was established in the late 40s, and it was the site of the first 10 jalsas. This is just a picture of one of those jalsa. The initial few jalsas were, very few people. This is a picture of, I think, one of the jalsas in the 4th or 5th jalsa. I can't remember which one. But eventually, towards the end of that decade or so of the first 10 years of the Jalsa Salana being held in the USA, there were about 250 members. The Jalsa that we go to in Harrisburg, these were the starting few Jalsas of that. Some people are very excited by the missionary coming and joining them for that Jalsa, so these pictures have been uncovered by them. This presentation has actually been put together by Ibrahim Ijaz Sahib. I think he's a teenager who has gone through some of the archives of American newspapers and dug up pictures that the Jamaat previously was not in possession of. If you would like, I can give you the references of all of these pictures and articles later on, if anybody's interested. Next slide, please. You can see the brotherhood on the faces of the people here. This was a picture when Masjid Fazal in D.C., Washington, D.C., was started in the 1950s. This was the first masjid in the nation's capital. It was significant. Khulafa would visit there. This is one of the pictures of the third Khalifa visiting the Ahmadis who lived in the United States at the time. And all the members of the Jamaat here are pictured from the 1950s. I'm not sure exactly what the event or occasion was, but this was found to be taken at Masjid Fazal. Next slide, please. 76. So the St. Louis chapter initially, there was a lot of steam at the time of the Mufti Muhammad Sadiq Saab. It was reinvigorated in the 1950s, and some members may know Abdullah Ali Sahib. He was well known to give azan, and there's a story that when New Year's would be celebrated, people would be celebrating with gunfire in the air. He would go out at that time and give the azan on his roof. Some more pictures from the St. Louis Jamaat. Some of these people, I'm sure many of the brothers here know. For the sake of time, I'm going to progress to the next slide. So in the 50s, there was a large group of people that became Ahmadi that belonged to the arts community and theater community in the United States. Not just in the 50s, but actually it started in the 30s, 20s, late 20s. Many of them are not mentioned here. So these are about 10 or so people that are mentioned. The most well-known mention of the folks here is Yusuf Latif Sahib, Bill Evans. If you've heard his music or Googled his name, obviously a great jazz musician. As an Ahmadi kid, heard many of his records. He was brought to Islam by another Philadelphia connection, as Sadr Saab I'm sure is about to point out. so I'll beat him to the punch. By Talib Daoud Sahib. Talib Daoud Sahib and his wife lived in Philadelphia. You know, Najma Daoud Sahiba and Talib Daoud Sahib are well known to people who grew up around here. Essentially, Yusuf Latif Sahib became Ahmadi and later on really spread the message of Islam and Ahmadiyyat in his circles. So there are many people who are credited to have been introduced to Islam by Yusuf Latif Sahib. If you ever met him, he was a tremendously warm individual, and you know, it was hard not to get a feeling of warmth whenever you were in his presence. The few other musicians that are named are Ahmad Saeed Percy Smith Sahib, another very popular jazz musician, St. Louis connection there, and another Philadelphia connection, Muhammad Sadiq Sahib. I knew him as a child when he was much later in his years. I never heard him play. I wish I had. There are many names of many musicians, and in actuality, there are many actors and people in Hollywood. It's a very small circle. So Ahmadiyyat infiltrated that circle early on. They're literally countless. You can Google any one of their names, and their entire Google page is full of their accomplishments. Ahmad Jamal Sahib is pictured here. So I'm just going to read off a few of these names. Ahmad Jamal Sahib is pictured here. Frederick Jones, if you want to Google it. Liaquat Ali Salman, Kenny Clark, Sahib Shihab, Edward Gregory, Suleiman Saud, McCory Tyner, Abdullah ibn Buhaira, Art Blakely, he's very well known, Haj Rashid, Lynn Hope, and Alia Rabia, Dakota Station. So this is, if you read some of their biographies, they mention their introduction to Islam and Ahmadiyyat in their biographies, very well known. This is a good bit of investigative work that was done here. Next slide, please.
I just wanted to mention, just emphasize on Uncle Haji Talib Dawood, who was, as he mentioned, he was a great trumpeter. He played with the likes of Duke Ellington and Art Blakely and Louis Armstrong. He was very instrumental in getting the jazz musicians to adopt Islam. He also was very adamant against the Nation of Islam at the time because of their positions, and he received many death threats in regard to his efforts. So again, his wife was Auntie Najma Dawood, may Allah have mercy on her, and just the roots, all these different roots, and the strength of Philadelphia and our impact on Islam and Ahmadiyyat.
Yeah, Dawood Sahib, I remember a few conversations with him. You brought that up. Thank you for reminding me, Rafiq Saab. At the time in the 60s, African American community was really being spread into a few directions. There were those who, the voice of Dr. Martin Luther King appealed to them. There was the voice of the political movement within African Islam that appealed to them, Malcolm X and the likes. And Dawood Sahib mentioned some of the things in the conversations that were had early on, and he was a big proponent of, let's stay within the fold of Islam instead of following a certain nationalistic fervor of the African movements within Islam and creating animosity towards others. So he was a big proponent of that, and he mentioned some of those early conversations. He would tell us when he had met Malcolm X and how Malcolm had gone to the Ahmadi masjids many times until he finally went to Hajj and sort of really understood his identity and really branched the African American Muslims towards more of a nationalistic identity and away from the unifying identity of Islam. Next slide, please. Talib Dawood Sahib, you can find his picture on any one of those Salat posters. If any of the kids have learned Salat or Azan through those posters, on alislam.org, he is the African American who is leading the prayer. Is that?
That's not him.
Is that him? Oh, that's Khalid Mahmoud Sahib. Yes, you're right. I'm trying to think of where I've seen his picture in Jamaat pictures. That's a famous one. There's another place. Anyway, next slide. So I think this is the last of the batch of slides, possibly. So I just wanted to mention that we're reinvigorating the same message that Hazrat Masih Maud Islam brought. If you notice the True Islam campaign that started recently in the 60s, it was the exact same thing. Some of these things were super eye-opening to people. Believe in one God, all the prophets, that there is no original sin. This is shocking to Western civilization. The Adam and Eve story and blaming women for being the perpetrators of the reason mankind was expelled from heaven is no small thing. You could talk an entire lecture about this topic, original sin. The resurrection of the soul, and on and on and on. These are essentially rewordings of the True Islam campaign that has been emphasized lately. In the 60s, there was a lot of advertisement, both through print, radio, and television, to tell people about the Imam Mahdi. That's what this slide is focusing on. Next slide, please. And I think this is the next speaker. Jazakallah.
So I apologize both to the speakers and also the audience that there is so much history to cover and there's so much work that has gone into it to try to cram up in a short period of time. And also the speakers didn't have much time to prepare because these slides were given to them just a day before yesterday. So it is hard, it is too much to ask of them to be able to condense the information and have just 10 minutes that have been allotted to them. So I apologize to them as well, and also the audience. So what we are going to do, we are running way late, so what we are going to do is now break for the Zohar prayer. We're already 15 minutes over, but please do not, pardon me? Yeah, so as we do the azan, I would request the Lajna to line up also, but they start their lines from line number 5, from the row number 5, so they are behind the Imam on this side, just to be clear, because we are not going to move this stage and everything, so we leave it as it is. On the ladies' side, if they start their rows from 5th back, then they will be